I'm very excited to be here today from home, learning so much about these wonderful speakers. In this session, we have Mariana Silva from the Department of Computer Science at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I want to introduce her. I will be reading from some notes that I grabbed from her website and also a communication that we had earlier today. Dr. Silva is known for her teaching innovations and her research in large-scale computer-based assessments and collaborative learning in STEM university courses. She has extensive experience in course development for engineering, computer science, and mathematics. Dr. Silva is currently the PI on an NSF IUSE grant. The grant aims to explore the interconnections between online learning, equity, and access. Dr. Silva is also the co-founder of Prairie Learn, which is a company dedicated to opening the door for instructors to improve their teaching workflow without compromising the quality of education. So I'm very excited to have Mariana today. She will be talking about innovative online tools. So Mariana, this is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today and share my little story about how I started using online tools to bring innovations to several courses here at the University of Illinois. But due to the limited time, I'm going to focus on some innovations I've done in my course. And here at Computer and Science, so I moved from mechanical engineering, so I explored some courses in there, to computer and science, but I will focus on the computer science work that I've done in the last 5 years. All right. Since you're here today, I'm assuming that you have thought at some point about improving your courses and learning about all these different buzzwords that we see when we talk about education research. So active learning, collaborative learning, specification grading, equity grading, sense of belonging, etc. And we have seen a rapid increase in the number of all the different type of available online tools that support all these different pedagogies. My thing, can I just 1 second move the zoom out of my face because this is really, all right. I'm now able to move things. Okay, sorry. So before I talk about my course innovations, I need to introduce the educational tool that I use to allow me to implement all these cool things in my course. So Prairie Learn is an online assessment platform that was developed by faculty here at the University of Illinois, and we're very unsatisfied with the available tools. So we're mostly using textbook publisher tools. They were easy to use, that was fine, but the question types were very limited, fill in the blank checkbox. They're not very nice and not very robust. So Prairie Learn, on the other hand, will allow instructors to write what we call question generators. So they're basically pieces of code, HTML and Python code, that can grade themselves, provide feedback to students, and they will unlock many different cool question types. So I'll show you some of these sophisticated questions that we have. They don't dumb down how students learn and how we assess their learning. So this first example that you see here on the left is a mathematical proof. So students just drag and drop boxes in order to grade their mathematical proofs. This other problem here is very typical in statics and strength of materials. So now they're dragging and drop objects. They're vectors, straight lines, and quadratic curves. So they can create free body diagrams, shear and bending moment diagrams. They're very typical in these type of classes. They're auto-graded and they also get immediate feedback. The other example is more typical in calculus classes. So you have here a function, in the case is a trajectory, is generated at random. The graph corresponding to that equation is also generated at random. And then the students now need to draw the secant line for that curve. They have to input some answers. They get feedback automatically. They can progress and try different variants of that question. So you can see we can go above and beyond what we can traditionally get in other systems. So one of the key aspects of Prairie Learn is that it lets you create those question generators. So it's not a static version of a question. And in this way, students can practice many times the same question until mastery is achieved. So the auto grading and the media feedback together will allow students to actually work on their own pace. You can see in these demos that they're getting feedback, they're checking it again, creating another version of the question and submitting again to get it graded and feedback. One example that I like showing is that this one on the left, students actually get auto-graded of symbolic expressions. They're not hard-coded as string expressions. So these are not just compare one-to-one as a string, they're instead evaluated as a mathematical expression. So we know that 2 times x is the same as 5 times 4 times x, and they're both correctly graded using Prairie Learn. So now that we have all those cool questions, we can use them in different types of assessments. So in my course, for example, I tell students that I have different flavors of assessments since they all learn in different ways. So for each module or a topic, as you can see, here's an example of one of them, I have different flavors. So first, in the formative assessments, I have my pre-lectures since my class is flipped. So they have videos, short checkpoints, etc. Then students can master the content in the homework. So that's multiple choice, fill in the blank, coding questions. It's a computer science course. They can get extra examples with an interactive Jupyter notebook. Those are not 4 points in my course. And then they come to the classroom and they work in group activities, also through Jupyter notebooks, but now longer applied to real world applications. So once I have all those different modules, the way I work, each module will have, each unit will have 3 or 4 modules. And at the end of each unit, I'm gonna have my summative assessments, my quizzes. So for the formative assessments, students get unlimited attempts. They can try as many times as they want. They get auto-grade, immediate feedback. I usually tell them that they have to complete a question correctly 2 or 3 times in order to show that they achieved mastery so they can move on. These activities can happen at their own pace, asynchronously. And I've been exploring a lot with flexible deadlines, and I'll show that towards the end of this presentation. Once they finish with their formative assessments, they go and they take a quiz. It happens bi-weekly. Those quizzes, the questions are now fixed for each student, but of course different among the different students in the class using randomization of the parameters. And they can retry the question during the quiz if they get it wrong, but now is for reduced credit, which is opposite to what happens during the formative assessments. I provide the students with a practice quiz, and that is generated out of the same pool of questions that they get during the actual quiz. So they can ahead of time practice and learn at their own pace at home. All right, so now this is finally the outline, and I know it took a little while. So I'll talk about 3 different projects that I've done in the last few years. So first of all, how I developed computer-based collaborative learnings for 3 different courses in the computer and science department. And now that tool has been adopted across departments and even other universities. Then I will show you a couple of different studies that I did on formative assessments with flexible deadlines. And then I'll move on to summative assessments and talk about frequent testing. First one, before the pandemic, let's go, before spring 2020, I was teaching in this very large lecture hall that you see in the picture. About 250 students fit there at a time. My class has between 400 and 500 students, so I had to teach twice, back to back, in order to accommodate all the students. The material was available online, so everything was through Prairie Learn. Lectures were recorded. So attendance, of course, was low. I had all these resources, classroom and so on, and maybe 30% of the students were coming. So I decided to put some group work. I designated some lectures as being group work lectures. They were required to come by giving them participation points. And of course, attendance went high. But at the same time, high went the complaints. Students were nagging, I don't like that. You should not force me to come to lecture. I would go around the classroom. They were playing Pokemon. They were chatting with their friends. They were really not doing the activity. And indeed, they reported at the survey at the end of the semester that 40% of the students reported that they were not doing anything. They were just sitting there waiting for the answers. They were just there because of the participation points. So clearly I was completely blind. I was not achieving what I wanted. I didn't know what they were doing, if they were working the activity, if they were collaborating as they were supposed to, or if they were learning at all. So I decided we had to do something different. That summer of the pandemic, I sat with 2 other professors in the computer science department, and we decided to develop a group feature within Priority Learn to help us flip our courses so that we could do better class interaction when we were on these breakout rooms or just our Zoom lectures during the pandemic. So with the group feature that we developed, now both the assessment and the grades were shared among all the members in the group. We created guided activities that can be completed by student groups pretty much on their own, like pretty much on their own pace without the support of a course staff. They use instead all this scaffolding, auto grading, and immediate feedback. If they did get stuck, they could request for help during class. So instructors now and course staff, instead of delivering content, they were just acting as facilitators during these group activities. We also encourage students to assign roles, so we call structure roles. If some of you know it, they're known as POGO roles. So that could encourage collaboration among team members. This project is funded by NSF. It's an IUSE award that we got a couple of years ago, so we still have 1 more year to go. We're still collecting lots of data, doing improvements. Hopefully there will be a lot more work coming out of that, but I want to show you what we've accomplished in the last 2 years. So here's how the group feature works. Groups can be formed in 3 different ways. So first, instructors can pre-arrange these groups. The other option is that Priority Learn sends students at random in different groups, or students can assign themselves to groups. So here I'm going to show you a short video where a student is creating their own group. They get a join code that is sent to their peers, which are going to use that join code now to join the group. So that's done on their own. Once it reaches a minimum number of students, they can start the assessment that you can see it now showing. And one really nice feature of Priority Learn that we implemented was this ability to prevent students from moving from the beginning of the activity to the end separately. So we know students like to divide and conquer. So there could be a tendency to say, oh, you do part 1, you do part 2. We don't want that to happen in our collaborative learning activity. So the questions are locked and they can only move to part 2 if they finish part 1, then they can move to part 3 and so on. The other thing that we implemented was the ability to synchronize the actual environment they are working together, because not necessarily they're going to be in the classroom sitting next to each other. They may be remotely connected during this work. So the environment has to be synchronized. For my class, I use Jupyter Notebooks. So they launched this nice environment that has all the directions. It has all the scaffolding pieces. There may be videos or images, and they have to complete small pieces of code. So you can see here that this is an example of one student completing a small piece of code. The student is going to evaluate that cell, see what they're getting. They go back to the Priority Learn page, submit it for answer. They get feedback immediately. They got that wrong. They say to their friend, hey, can you help me? So you can see, just like Google Docs, someone else is completing it. They check it, go back to Priority Learn, submit it again for answer, get the feedback, and now they got it correct. They can move on. And that can happen, as I said, from students in different type of the earth, if needed be. Then pandemic was getting closer to the time we're in right now, and we're back in the classroom. We can actually use the classroom again. So I'm now able to get this beautiful classroom. It's a new building that was just built during the pandemic, actually. And we can use that for my class. It holds up to 200 students, but I usually only have 140 to 170 registering in this in-person section. I still offer an online section, so it's completely hybrid. Students have the option to register in one or the other. They're offered at the same time. The online has no capacity, but usually I have about 300 students registering that one, and the students can go to breakout rooms to work on the group activities. For the support in the in-person, traditional thing, raise their hand, ask for help. Someone of from the core staff is going to go there and help the students. For the online, we use this really cool app called the Queue, which helps the core staff know where the students need help. So they always stay signed up. You can see a bunch of my core staff signed up on this queue. Students are also registered on this queue. They can post their question. They can tell people where they are, which breakout room they are, and then core staff will move there and help the student out, mark the question as answered. It works really well. I've been able to handle this with about a 30-to-1 ratio between student and core staff. And as I said, this all happens at the same time. Those 450 students are all at the same time completing these activities. In order to facilitate the collaboration among students, we've been adopting these structured roles. So we have 3 so far. The manager keeps teams on task, the recorder enters most of the answers in PrairieLearn, and the reflector makes sure everyone is keeping up with the activity. Students are encouraged to have at least 1 role for each assigned week, but they should be alternating among the entire semester with the students in the group. All right, so now that I introduced how PrairieLearn works with group assignments and all the new things that we did, we want to see if these impacts change students' experience and hopefully for the better. This is the very first study that we did on this project. We're doing more and more through the next year. So in the first one, the data was from the pandemic. So we have fall 2020 and spring 2021, and we want to compare data from these 2 semesters. The first semester, which I will be calling student scheduled semester, class attendance was not required, and we did not have structured roles. So that means free for all. So it was very student driven at the very start of the pandemic. And the next semester, we said, okay, so let's require attendance. So now students have to attend the Zoom meeting, and let's now use these structural roles. And in order to require attendance and require students to use the roles, of course, we had to give them points. That's kind of how it works, unfortunately. So these are the 2 semesters, student schedule, instructor schedule. We use clickstream data from PrairieLearn to quantify student behavior during that group activity. So you can see here an example of 5 different weeks of group activity, week 5, 6, and 7. In each of them, you have those dots. Those dots represent a student submission. It's a 1 interaction within PrairieLearn. And each different color that takes a line, it's a unique student. So you have here in activity 7, 3 students working on that. And in the top activity, you have 2 students working on that. If we look at data at the student schedule semester, you can see that the submissions happen almost all at the same time, which potentially indicates that students are working at different parts of the assignment. So they are probably doing some of the divide and conquer strategy. But if we look at the instructor schedule, because we have the roles, you see the majority of the submissions happening by 1 student only, which was probably the recorder of that week. Now we take a look at further the data. We want to look at different metrics. The first one we want to find out is the quality of contribution between these 2 course offerings. So because we know that in 1 course offering, the instructor's schedule, the contributions are mostly done by 1 student each class time. Instead, we sum all the contributions of the entire semester, so we could get the percentage contribution of each team member. So in this plot here, you can see how that works. So this is an example of 1 group for the entire semester. You can see that this student here in orange is doing most of the contributions during the semester, while the green student is barely contributing anything at all. But you have another example of a group where they're mostly contributing the same across the entire semester. So we decided to propose this equality metric here to measure student contribution, and I'll have to use those bar plots. This equality metric says the following. Let's take the standard deviation of the percentage of submissions of each member, and we normalize that with the maximum possible standard deviation. We use that normalization because now the metric varies from 0 to 1, where 0 is a group where 1 student is doing all the work, And if the quality matrix is 1, that means that every student is equally splitting all the work. So now we're going to take a look how this metric changes in both semesters for the entire semester, during the entire semester for all different group activities. So here you can see the distribution of equality score. Just as an example, we can look at this last 2 bars here. That means that you have 10% of the groups in the instructor scheduled semester, that's the orange, achieving 0.9 to 0.95 equality score, but you only have about 2% of the groups achieving that same score in the student scheduled semester. So if we were to look at the entire distribution over the semester, we found out that the instructor scheduled semester had significantly more equality in the number of submissions among team members than the student scheduled semester. And that was significant. We want to look at even more metrics. So the other ones reflect the quality of the learning experience. So we had 2 metrics for that. One is the quality of submission. We could not use for quality of submission the maximum score in that activity because students have unlimited attempt. So they all should be able to get 100% by the end of the semester. You can see in this little example that I put on the top, 2 teams that accomplish 100% score at the end, but one had an average score of 95% and the other team had an average score of 53. So we decided to use this average submission score as our metric for quality of submission. If we look at the entire semester, we notice that students in the instructor scheduled semester score better than the ones in the student scheduled semester for pretty much on average a full letter grade. The other metric that we used was time for completion. So it's the summation of time between submissions. So students in the instructor schedule completed the group work faster than the ones in the student scheduled semester, on average 2.0 hours faster for the entire semester. So they're completing it better and faster. We also want to find out about sense of belonging. So we asked students to complete surveys at the end of the semester, including questions regarding their perception of comfort, support, and isolation in the class. Those questions were validated by Hoffman in 2002. And we use that to understand how they feel regarding the entire class and also with respect to their own groups, within groups. So not surprisingly, students reported an increased sense of belongings within their own group when compared to the rest of the class, since they were spending most of the time with students within their group, in their assigned group. And women reported increased sense of belonging when compared to men in both whole class and within group. We have a lot more data on sense of belonging for underrepresented minorities and first generation. We're still processing, compiling all of those. Hopefully it will be in a future publication. So the takeaway so far that we have from the use of collaborative learning is that we can do that at scale now with auto grading and immediate feedback. We have a dashboard that we can see what's happening in the class. The students can do that synchronously and asynchronously. It allowed us to be able to have a flipped classroom, and students are reporting to be more engaged. They don't complain anymore. They're actually excited about working with their peers during class time. And our first findings regarding how effective that is, we found that if we use synchronous activity and structured roles, there is a better distribution of the workload and students complete the activities faster and with better quality. So we're going to move on to the next project, which was still on formative assessments, but the idea of flexible deadlines. I'm sure that we have all experienced a situation like this when a student is asking, well, can I get an extension? Can I get a drop? You know, I have an interview, I'm sick, there's a holiday, can you do something about it? Handling these requests consistently can be very challenging. At least it is very challenging for me having a large class. And I want to make sure I'm consistent, that I don't forget what I did to student A and student B and so on. So I started thinking, do we really need to have these strict deadlines? Students learn at different pace. So can we expect them to master the content all at the same time? Why not let them work at their pace they need to be and give them the flexibility and the opportunity to do so? So when using PriorityLearn or any other auto grading system, we don't need to fix a deadline because we don't have to have that date that we start to grade all the papers that we collected when they submitted, right? So we can let students work on their own assignments for as long as they need until they achieve mastery. It's something that is there. It can be done because of the automated process. So the question that I really had in my head is like, I have the ability to do that, but is that good? Should I just remove the deadlines completely, soften the deadlines? What should I do with that resource that I have? So here's again a picture of my course, so you can have an idea of this study. So I have 5 different units, and each unit covers about 2 to 3 modules. And at the end of each unit, students will take an exam or a quiz. Each one will have about 4 to sometimes even 6 homeworks. So those are the formative assessments. Once they finish that, they have the summative assessment, which is the exam. I unfortunately cannot just change the dates much of my summative assessments. I do have to have a grade by the end of the semester, and the students need to keep up with all those different frequent testing that I have. But I can have flexibility on my formative assessments. So I decide to keep fixed all my exam dates, but I decided to do something about the homework deadlines. So in the first idea, what I did was and I call that the lenient schedule. They had 1 week to submit each homework, which was normal, just like in the past, for 100% credit, but they could submit all these assignments by the very end of the semester for 96% credit, which is basically an A, even if they submit everything at the end of the semester. But hopefully that 4% reduction gave a little bit of incentive for them to finish it earlier and not procrastinate until the end. That at least was my hope. The second flexible schedule, which I call strict, which is just strict by comparison with the lenient, I took that deadline, and instead of the end of the semester, I moved that deadline to the exam date corresponding to that unit. So in this example here, homeworks 3, 4, 5, and 6 would be completed within a week for 100% credit, but it can be completed all by exam to date for 96% credit. So let's see what happened with the 2 different deadlines. So first of all, I want to show those histograms, which I call completion of the homework by the deadline. So this first plot that you have here is from fall 2019, which had only the 100% hard deadline within 1 week. And I'm doing this for reference only. So in that semester, they had 14 homeworks, and they were allowed to have 1 drop. So what I call completed all the homeworks are students that completed either 13 or 14 homeworks, and that's about 80% of the class in my reference semester, which I only had the hard deadline. If I look at now in the 2 semesters with the softer deadline, I had 19 homeworks total. They had 2 drops, so 19, 18, and 17 for me is completed all the homeworks. So you can see them circled here with this purple box. And I was shocked when I saw this at first. I come from having completing 80% by that 100% deadline, and now only about 25% of the students are actually completing the homework by the 100% deadline. So they're definitely procrastinating and leaving this for the future. And my question was like, when are they completing these homeworks, right? Are they really waiting until the last day? So I decided to investigate further. On this very last histogram is the deadline, the completion rate by the very end of the semester. So you can see the students in the lenient schedule, where this is the actual deadline, late deadline for 96%, only 67% of the students were completing it by the deadline. If I look at the lenient semester, where the deadline is the exam date, I have 71% of the students completing it by the deadline. An interesting thing that I noticed is that I had about 50% of the students in the lenient semester still completing it by the exam date, which was not an explicit deadline, But thankfully for 50% of the students was just that implicit deadline. Hey, I should finish my formative assessment since I'm about to take an exam. However, these other 50% seem to not care, and they were not finishing the formative assessments before taking the exam. So I was really concerned, is this really a good idea? So I did some regression to check what was happening and how the completion of these assessments were impacting the homework. So the baseline students for the linear semester, again, are the students that do not complete the homework. So these are about 33% of the class. So that's the baseline of my regression. And what I find out is that if the remaining students, if they do complete it by the end of the semester, they get about a 9% advantage on their exam score when compared to the baseline students. If they work a little harder and finish it by the exam date, which again is not a deadline, it's an implicit deadline, they get a very nice bump and get an almost 18% advantage when compared to the baseline students. But if they work even harder and finish those homework by within 1 week, the 100% deadline, they only get a 3% bump here, as you can see, for a total of 21% advantage when comparing to my baseline students. So what I found out is that, in summary, there is a significant benefit for completing the homeworks by the exam date, but only a very small gain to complete within 1 week. So I was like, well, the strict schedule seems to be a great thing. That was actually the motivation from moving to this strict schedule. Here's now the results from the same regression now, but using data from the strict schedule. Now
Mariana,
my base.
We have 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes.
Oh, okay. So I only have 35 minutes and mine is saying 30. Oh, it's because it took the beginning. Okay, I will cut even more. So these are the results from the strict semester. I had showing here that students actually get a very nice bump by finishing it by the exam date. And again, another small bump by completing within a week. Students really like the strict semester deadline. They say it's encouraging, motivating. They think every class should do that. So the takeaway is basically the strict deadline is something that is great. It's a nice trade-off. The students get enough incentive for completing the formative assessment before the summative assessments. They really love the flexibility, and I don't get any more complaints and requests for extensions. I want to move to this one directly since I'm running out of time. So this was the idea of, okay, let's do frequent testing because we know frequent testing is good for our students. I'm skipping a little bit of the intro. And this happened in 2 different semesters. So those 2 different semesters, I had my control, which was 2 midterms and 1 final exam. And the second semester, I had 8 quizzes and 1 final exam. So the only difference now is the frequency of this summative semesters assessments during the semester, but the final exam is identical in these 2 different semesters. And you can see that by just adding more frequent assessments to the students, you can get a 2 times more letter A's on that same final exam and reduce by 2.5 the number of failing grades on that same final exam. So we're very encouraged about our results. And because of that, we want to make sure that we can scale that for every class, all the students. And how we do that is by actually using our tests from a computer-based testing facility. So instead of now, again, doing all these exams and correction and grading by hand, we send students to this nice computer-based testing facility where they can take exams at scale. We have proctors that coordinate all of these. It's all secure. Most importantly, content does not go out of CBTF. Students cannot have access to ChatGPT or Chegg, all the things that make us be really, really concerned about cheating. So the part that unfortunately I will not have time to share with you today, but please ask me afterwards, is that one concern that we had many years ago is that students may be talking during the exam time of the CBTF, which happens in a period of 3 to 4 days. So they may not know, they may be able to communicate among themselves and exchange information. So we did a lot of studies to actually quantify how much information they were getting because of the asynchronous nature of tests inside a computer-based testing facility. So I think I need to stop based on Patricia's call. And if you have questions on that, I can do during the Q&A or any other questions you have. And sorry if I had to rush on this last topic. I thought I had 40 minutes.
No, Mariana, thank you so much. Why don't you finish your short story here? That'll be my question. Could you please finish the story?
Okay. So the short version is that, so students, what we observed during those 3 to 4 days at the CBTF is that the average goes down and most of the students are taking in the last day, right? So we thought the process of communicating would be having some information producers taking the test first, passing the information to the information consumers, taking the test later, and that's how cheating happens. And our goal was, can we see who those information consumers are and how much they're benefiting from this exchange of information? So we did 2 students. One was to identify who they are. So we did that by placing the same question in the exam and the homework of that exam. And then the information producer would tell a friend, hey, question 4 is on the exam. And once we would see a spike on the information consumers working more and more and more on that same question during the exam period, that tagged them as an information consumer. So we observed that through an entire semester, getting data from every single exam. You can see here 13 different exams, that on average, only 5% of the students were classified as information consumers. So we're like, that's actually not bad at all. And but we also want to quantify the actual amount of gain they were having. So we did this crossover study inside the computer-based testing facility, where I had half of my students taking the exam synchronously at the CBTF, so all at the same time, secure environment. They've never seen the exam before. The rest of the class was taking asynchronously from Wednesday to Saturday. For the next exam, it would flip. The students that were in the asynchronous now are all taking at the same time. The rest of the students are taking asynchronous. And we had that flipping of the arrangement on the mode, how they were taking the exam. And we observed that the averages of the exams matched perfectly the same flipping of synchronous and asynchronous. So you can see that the average was always higher on asynchronous, always lower on the synchronous exam. So yes, students were benefiting from that asynchronous exam. On average, we found that through regression models, that was just 3-point gain from taking asynchronous exam. So I think that's kind of a very short. So sorry for running out of time. I want to say that I really think that we should be using machines, let machines do what they do better, which is all these automation, right? And let's us human focus on things that machines yet cannot do better. In-person communication, open-ended project, office hours, right? Let's interact with our students. Let's use that time that we're now gaining back from adopting computer-based tools and spending time with quality things with our students. So that was my main message today. Thank you.
Well, Mariana, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, so full of energy and great ideas. I want to see if we have questions from the audience. If anybody has a question, maybe they could unmute and pose the question or type it in the chat. Let's see. While people warm up to ask questions, I'm curious to know how instructors that are not at your institution could access Prairie Learn.
So there's 2 ways. Prairie Learn is open source. So people can run open source if they want, but the company that we founded was to actually offer Prairie Learn to other institutions as well. So if you go to PrairieLearn.com, you can get all the information there. The demand from people wanting to use PrairieLearn through the pandemic increased drastically. Nobody wants to run open source code. So we've started providing that service as well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So I see that John has a question.
Yeah, so I already put this in the chat so you can ignore it. So I do understand how you can do the auto grade and instant feedback with lots of different versions on anything that's sort of like equation based or mathematical, that type of thing. But some fields don't have the luxury of having their learning based on those type of outcomes. So do you have examples of where that's been done in fields where it's not so easy to generate many different attempts of the same concept?
So we only, like, PrairieLearn is really tailored mostly for quantitative questions, right? Something that you can kind of put in the form of code. We do have, it's a new work done with more open-ended questions, and we're using NLP and some new tools that we're generating to grade these, but it's not really the focus of PrairieLearn at this point.
All right, thank you.
It is much harder, like you said.
Okay, I see questions on the chat. I'm going to start backwards. So, Catherine, would you like to pose the question, or should we read it from the chat?
Sure. I was just wondering if when you assign the groups, if they're stable all semester, or if students work in different groups each week, or some rotation system.
So what we've tried several things of what we believe that works best. We give the first 2 weeks, we call it's their dating period. So they can get to know people in the classroom, they can rotate, do whatever they want. They have 2 weeks for that. Then they can self-select their groups. The students that don't self-select, usually it's about 20%. They don't find anybody after those 2 weeks. We assign them to groups that are fixed through the semester. By the middle of the semester, we just give a call out. Hey, if anybody's unhappy with your team, or you just want to try it out something new, let us know. And then we reformat only these groups from people that want, and it's usually not even 5% of the class.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. So I see a question from Megan Shiroda. Would you like to, the question is on the chat, and I see 3 people liking the question.
Yeah, I can ask it again. So I was wondering, for your formative assessments, you let students kind of complete them as many times as needed. Have you noticed any students who like start an attempt but don't actually get all the points because they're kind of struggling with the amount of time they have to put into their formative assessments? I've done this in the past, and I've always been kind of worried about my students who have jobs or children and other responsibilities.
So I try to be very attentive to that. So my formative assessments are not that long. They are constantly open, but they're not very long. I noticed that not every student get 100%. It is true. And it could be because of reasons like you're stating, or some of them are just like, I'm done, it's enough, like, because they don't have to complete everything to get an A, right? Like, every student, if they complete 90% or about that, they're still getting an A. So I think some of them just kind of stop. I try to be attentive of that. That's why I said I try twice or sometimes 3 times to show mastery, only if the question is really hard. I want to make sure they're showing they can get it. But sometimes I just ask them to solve it once.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see here one about the Jupyter Notebook to Josh. That's a easy one. So we do have an install of the Jupyter Notebook inside PrairieLearn. So it is a Jupyter lab that lives inside PrairieLearn.
Good. We have officially time for one more question. Mariana, let's see. There is a question by Stephanie Berg on the chat.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I can just read the question out loud. So the quality measurement that you had made for your students' engagement on the different homework items, it seems like we're assuming that students are expected to engage and should be expected to engage equally in that group work, but we know that students aren't engaging with homework and active learning environments the same, especially if they have learning disabilities. So how are you accounting for this in some of the measurements that you're being made, or is it something that you're considering?
We have not considered that yet. It's something that we're looking at. Just so these metrics are at this point are just trying to inform us of what's happening so we can create better dashboards and improve how we're providing these tools. So we don't use this metrics in any other way on just trying to understand, and we're just trying to improve upon. So this was just our very first one, just to take a look and if there was that domineer and freeloader effect, or if it was somewhat a equal distribution. And the most important thing for us is that we're trying to come up with, as I said, one, a dashboard, and another one is a way to facilitate these split of roles and task division inside Priority Learn. But the great thing for us to keep in mind, I agree with you. Not everybody should be working the same.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm trying to keep track of the time, and because we are at a virtual conference, I think we have to gauge our energy.
There's like a gap where they're expecting us to go talk to the NSF.
Am I able to save these questions so I can reach out to the ones that I didn't answer?
Yes, that's what I was proposing. Maybe those who want to stay can stay, or maybe people that want to join a small group discussion later today.
I don't have any like grants that I'm interested in.
I don't know what
I
is
don't know
going
who
on.
is.
Yeah.
Someone is not mute.
Yeah, it's okay. It happens. But what I would suggest, I like your idea, Mariana. Maybe we can keep track of the questions. Maybe we should have a pause at this session, have a break.